In a significant legal development, a federal appeals court has ruled that former President Donald Trump exceeded his authority by imposing sweeping tariffs on a wide range of imported goods. This decision marks a major setback for one of the signature elements of Trump's economic agenda, which aimed to reshape America's trade relationships and protect domestic industries through aggressive tariffs. The court's ruling strikes at the very core of Trump's trade strategy, which relied heavily on tariffs as a tool to pressure foreign governments and support American manufacturing. These tariffs affected billions of dollars in goods, from steel and aluminum to everyday consumer products, impacting businesses and consumers across the country. The judges found that Trump's use of a national emergency declaration to justify the tariffs was an improper application of federal law. This decision challenges the president's power to unilaterally shape economic policy, emphasizing that even in times of perceived crisis, the executive branch must operate within the boundaries set by Congress. The case was brought forward by a coalition of Democratic-led states and small businesses who argued that the tariffs effectively sidestepped Congress's constitutional authority over foreign commerce. They claimed the administration's actions placed undue burdens on American companies, especially smaller firms struggling to absorb higher costs. In a 7-4 decision, the court affirmed that presidential powers under the cited law are not limitless. The ruling reinforces the importance of legal checks on executive action, even when national security is invoked as justification. The majority opinion stressed that the separation of powers is a fundamental principle of American democracy. Despite the court's decision, the tariffs remain temporarily in effect, giving the current administration time to review the ruling and decide its next move. The Biden administration now faces a critical choice: whether to defend the tariffs in court, modify them, or roll them back entirely, each option carrying significant economic and political consequences. Trump quickly condemned the decision, vowing to fight on and warning of economic fallout if his policies are undone. He argued that removing the tariffs would harm American workers and weaken the country's negotiating position abroad, highlighting the deep and ongoing political divide over trade policy and the scope of executive power. As the legal battle continues, the debate over protectionism versus free trade is once again in the national spotlight. The outcome will have major stakes for American workers, businesses, and the nation's global economic relationships, ensuring that the controversy over tariffs and presidential authority remains a central issue in U.S. politics. The court's decision hinges on its interpretation of the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA. Trump's team argued the 1977 law gave the president broad authority to impose tariffs during a declared emergency, but the court disagreed. Judges ruled IEEPA was never meant to authorize sweeping, long-term changes to trade policy without a direct, specific threat. The ruling narrows IEEPA's scope, affirming that emergency powers can't replace Congress's constitutional role in trade. The lawsuit, led by states and small businesses, documented real economic harm from the tariffs, which the court validated. Not all Trump-era tariffs are affected, only those justified under IEEPA. Other tariffs, like those on steel and Chinese goods, remain under separate legal frameworks. This precedent could restrain future presidents from using emergency declarations to enact broad trade agendas. The ruling is a major blow to Trump's America First trade doctrine, which relied on aggressive tariffs to pressure other nations. By limiting unilateral presidential action, the decision could shift future trade negotiations back toward diplomacy and legislation. Trump has criticized the ruling as a threat to U.S. sovereignty, promising to keep fighting and ensuring the issue remains politically charged. The Justice Department warns that reversing the tariffs could cost the Treasury billions, complicating the administration's response. Businesses face uncertainty, unsure if tariff-related costs will vanish or persist, making long-term planning difficult. This instability can deter investment and create market volatility. The outcome will directly affect corporate strategies, consumer prices, and the broader U.S. economy. The legal fight's resolution will shape the future of American trade policy. For the moment, the tariffs remain firmly in place. The court's recent decision includes a temporary stay, which means the tariffs won't be lifted immediately. This pause is designed to prevent sudden market chaos and give all parties time to adjust to the legal uncertainty. Businesses, importers, and exporters must continue operating under the current tariff regime, at least for now, as everyone waits to see what happens next. The administration's likely next move is to petition the Supreme Court, escalating the dispute to the nation's highest judicial authority. This step would seek a final, definitive ruling on the legality of the tariffs and could set a major precedent for future trade policy. If the administration appeals, the legal battle could drag on for months or even longer. This ongoing uncertainty makes it extremely difficult for businesses to plan ahead, as they don't know whether tariffs will be lifted or remain in place. Many companies may delay investments, hiring, or expansion, waiting for clarity on the rules of international trade. On the other hand, if the administration chooses not to appeal, or if the Supreme Court declines to take up the case, the lower court's ruling would stand. In that scenario, the tariffs would be permanently revoked, providing immediate relief to importers and potentially lowering costs for American consumers and businesses that rely on foreign goods. Such a move would be widely celebrated by free trade advocates who have long argued that tariffs hurt the economy. However, it would also represent a clear and public rejection of former President Trump's signature economic policy, signaling a major shift in U.S. trade strategy. If the Supreme Court ultimately upholds the tariffs, it would set a powerful legal precedent, affirming broad presidential authority under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEPA. This would give future presidents significant leeway to impose tariffs or other trade restrictions in the name of national security. The stakes in this case are extremely high. The outcome will help define the balance of power between the president and Congress on trade issues for years to come, shaping how the U.S. responds to global economic challenges. For now, the business community, policymakers, and investors across the country are watching closely, awaiting the final word that will determine the future of U.S. trade policy. The Supreme Court doesn't automatically review every case. At least 4 justices must agree to hear it. This case, involving the separation of powers and presidential authority in trade, is likely to attract the court's attention. A Supreme Court ruling would clarify how far the president can go under IEPA, setting a national precedent. If accepted, both sides would present arguments, and the court's decision would become the law of the land. The outcome could either expand or limit presidential power in foreign policy and economic matters. The court's ideological makeup may influence the result, with justices divided over executive versus legislative authority. Legal experts and observers are watching closely, as the decision will have lasting constitutional implications. The ruling will be a landmark in defining presidential power in the modern era. The legal fight over tariffs has real and far-reaching economic consequences, acting as a direct tax on businesses across the country. When tariffs are imposed, they don't just exist as abstract policy, they translate into higher costs for companies that rely on imported goods and materials to keep their operations running smoothly. These increased costs ripple through the economy, raising consumer prices on everyday items. Many companies, especially small and family-owned businesses, struggle to absorb these new expenses. They often face tough choices: either pass the added costs on to customers, risking lower sales, or absorb the losses themselves, which can threaten their survival. Studies consistently show that most of the burden from tariffs falls on U.S. importers, and ultimately, on American shoppers. This means that the price hikes are felt most acutely at the checkout counter, where families see their budgets stretched thinner. For low and middle-income families, these increases can be especially painful, forcing difficult decisions about what to buy and what to cut back on. Politically, tariffs remain a deeply divisive issue, sparking heated debates in Congress, the media, and communities nationwide. Supporters argue that tariffs are vital for protecting American jobs and industries from unfair foreign competition, and they see them as a tool to strengthen the nation's manufacturing base. Critics, however, call tariffs self-inflicted economic wounds that disrupt supply chains, raise costs, and invite retaliation from trading partners. The court's ruling on the legality of these tariffs is seen by some as judicial overreach, while others view it as a necessary check on executive power, ensuring that no single branch can unilaterally reshape trade policy. The debate is especially heated in manufacturing communities where jobs and livelihoods are directly affected, and among exporters who have been hurt by retaliatory tariffs from other countries. These exporters face shrinking markets and uncertain futures. The final outcome of this legal and political battle will shape not just the direction of U.S. economic policy, but also the political legacy of unilateral trade action. The stakes are high for workers, businesses, and the future of America's trade strategy in an increasingly interconnected world. Even if broad IEEPA tariffs are struck down, presidents still have tools to impose tariffs under other laws. Section 301 of the Trade Act allows targeted tariffs after investigations of unfair foreign practices, as seen with some China tariffs. Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act lets the president act on national security grounds, but its use is limited and controversial. These alternatives require more oversight, investigations, and often congressional consultation, slowing the process. If the court's ruling stands, future trade actions may rely more on multilateral negotiations and formal legislation. The president would retain authority for targeted measures, but sweeping unilateral tariffs would be much harder to enact. This could return U.S. trade policy to a more predictable, collaborative framework. While trade policy dominates headlines, data privacy is another critical issue shaping daily life. Companies like NBC Universal collect vast user data, and new laws require more transparency and user control. Users can opt out of data sharing for advertising, but must do so on each device and browser and repeat after clearing cookies. Opting out doesn't eliminate ads, just makes them less personalized. Managing privacy also means controlling location data through device settings. Understanding these controls is essential digital literacy, empowering users to decide who accesses their information. Reading privacy policies and using available tools helps protect personal data. As digital life expands, privacy choices matter more than ever. The court's rejection of Trump's tariff plan forces a national debate on presidential power and economic policy. The ruling pushes back against using emergency powers for sweeping trade changes without Congress. The outcome will affect businesses, consumers, and the presidency itself, defining the limits of unilateral executive action. Upholding the tariffs would entrench presidential power. Striking them down would restore congressional authority. The debate also reflects America's shifting role in global trade, between economic nationalism and multilateral cooperation. As the legal process unfolds, the nation must decide how much power a president should have to act on trade. The answer will shape U.S. leadership and economic strategy for years to come.